So if you look up Joyce Hoffman on Wikipedia, and I've read many articles about Joyce in the last few days, the first sentence describes a pioneer, regarded as the first female international surfing star, the first quickly pile up, first to inductee to the International Surfing Hall of Fame, the first woman to surf the Banzai Pipeline in Hawaii, the first to be listed as the LA Times Woman of the Year, the first woman to have a surfboard named after her, and the first female statue in our own Waterman's Plaza. Joyce determined at an early age that she was going to be the best at her sport, and was mindful of her representation of the sport to others. No one can dispute that from a very determined and extraordinarily hard-working and hard-driving 13-year-old, Joyce attained the pinnacle of her athleticism, but I think it speaks just as clearly to her character that she cared so much for the sport's reputation and ensuring its future. So with that, I would like to introduce Joyce Hoffman.
Can you hear me? Wow. I am so happy to be here this evening. I want to personally thank each and every one of you for coming. It's a fear of mine that only 6 or 7 people will show up at one of my speaking engagements. Discounting my family, my friends, and all the shoppers I bribed at the Costco parking lot yesterday, it's a relief to see a dozen or so new faces out here. Thank you for joining us. I want to thank Joel Bishop, Bruce Beal, Max Brown, Nancy Jenkins, and Heidi Hyde of the Dana Point Historical Society Board, and let them know how much I appreciate this wonderful honor and for hosting this event. They have done so much to preserve the history of our city and making that information accessible. I especially want to thank the president of the society, Barbara Johannes, whose tireless work is very much appreciated and admired by all of us. And a big shout out to Joe Dunn, a very long-time family friend who wrote the book Woolen to Waves about my family's business, Hoffman California Fabrics. His research helped me put some thoughts together for this presentation. Thank you, Joe. I also spoke with a few board members about how to make this talk a little more interesting than just focusing on my surfing achievements. And that discussion made me reflect on my youth, how surfing became the sport I dedicated myself to, my family's unique role in beach culture, and my other pursuits outside of surfing. Keep in mind, I grew up in the 50s and the 60s when the sport menu was much smaller than it is today. As a little girl, I was extremely competitive and a very sore loser, to the point of being barred from the family ping pong table by the time I was 10. So I took up tennis. I took lessons at the Capitol High School and immediately fell in love with tennis. There weren't tennis clubs around then, so finding others to play with, scheduling and getting a ride was a real chore for a 10-year-old. The Olympics were my fairy tale. When they were on, no one was allowed to change the channel without my permission. Olympians were my heroes, and I wanted to be one. So I was particularly drawn to Olympic sports. My family often took ski trips to the Sierras. I loved the mountains and skiing, but they were so far from the beach. How could I become an Olympic skier unless I moved to the mountains? I could outrun and outthrow many boys by the time I was in middle school, so I thought track and field might be a good fit for me. By the time I was 12, my mom was hauling me back and forth to Orange Coast College, where I got to work out with the track team. Everyone wanted me to focus on their specialty. Shot putters wanted me to throw, runners wanted me to run, and jumpers wanted me to jump. My Olympic fairy tale was coming to life. I was in heaven. The only problem was my mom had to drive me there every day. Costa Mesa was a long way from Dana Point. even before traffic and when gas was only 30 cents a gallon. Parents weren't pseudo-coaches and agents molding their children into professional athletes back then. I had 3 siblings Mom had to care for while Dad was at work. Keep in mind, my dad, Walter, and Uncle Flippy were superb watermen. Both became big wave pioneers. During their youth, their family had a summer home in Laguna Beach, just down the street from Hobie Alter's family. Hobie was just learning to surf and was fascinated with the mechanics of making a surfboard. Dad showed Hobie where to source the materials and helped him build his first surfboard, the infancy which would eventually become Hobie's business empire, including surfboards, catamarans, gliders, and clothing. Eventually, my dad signed up for the Navy during the Korean War. As luck would have it, he was stationed in Hawaii. He worked the evening shift, of course, and surfed during the day. He submerged himself in the culture and styles of the Aloha spirit. When his commitment was up, he came home and started working for his father's business, Hoffman, California Woolens, a textile manufacturer and wholesaler of wool fabrics, started by his father, Rube, in 1926. Walter's first contribution to the family business was to change the company's name to Hoffman California Fabrics and to focus on tropical prints. Soon, Hoffman California Fabrics hired their own in-house artists and developed their own prints, giving rise and popularity to the Aloha shirt. So it's 1959 and I live in Capo Beach. The ocean is right outside my door and it's a huge part of my family's lifestyle. Surfing was in the very early stages of becoming a competitive sport. There were contests, but very few surfers took them seriously. Surfing was more an activity than a legitimate sport. It certainly wasn't Olympic material. But those factors made it perfect for my particular skill set. Timing, as they say, is everything. Once I decided to make surfing the outlet for my competitive nature, there was no stopping me. The reason for my success was due to the fact that I was the first surfer to pursue it as a legitimate sport, to add a very competitive level to it. I trained, which was unheard of at the time. Most surfers were free spirits who didn't like to follow rules and for the most part lacked discipline. While I was lifting weights, running, swimming, and competing in paddling races to improve my strength and endurance, others were just surfing and, well, partying. It was the 60s after all. I didn't drink, smoke, or do drugs. I was a very serious young lady, and I was determined to be the best. I treated surfing like it was an Olympic sport. I made a fitness and practice schedule that became my life. I surfed every day, no matter how poor the conditions. This turned out to be a huge advantage because most contests in California were held at beach breaks in less than stellar conditions. Learning how to make the most of crappy surf gave me a real edge over my competition. Contests were typically judged on a surfer's best 3 of 5 waves in a 30-minute heat. So it was really important to have 5 waves to ensure 3 good ones. Paddling was so important and the most taxing part of surfing. It wasn't always easy catching 5 waves in just 30 minutes. With my cross training, especially paddling contests, which I have to say I won every one I entered, I had a remarkable advantage. Another practice I adhered to for a competitive edge was surfing at every contest site for weeks before the actual event. I wanted to become every bit as familiar with each surf break as I was with my own spot. I approached surfing like other professional athletes approached their sport. No other surfer was doing that back then. Not the men, not the women. It gave me an advantage that eventually changed the nature of competitive surfing. My life philosophy is that timing plays a huge role in life, and it's something we have very little control over. Sometimes we are at the right spot at just the right time to take advantage of an opportunity, whether it be a set wave, a career path, or other life events. My timing was fortunate in that my career coincided with one of the biggest waves to ever hit surfing, the 60s. That was when a lot of diverse influences grew together to form one giant swell that swept across America. And I was lucky enough to be in the right spot to catch it, Southern California. Our coast became a confluence of surf-themed music, Dick Dale and the Deltones, the Ventures, the Beach Boys, Jan and Dean, surf-themed movies, the Beach Blanket Bingo series, Gidget, actual surf movies like Surfing Holidays and Endless Summer, and surf-inspired clothing from Aloha shirts to Hang Ten and Ocean Pacific. All were sprouting up quickly. Madison Avenue's newfound love affair in this once quirky sport coincided with my rise in it. Eventually, after 12 years of laser focus on surfing, the challenge was no longer enough. I'd accomplished everything I had hoped, and there were a lot of young women nipping at my heels. I wanted to go out on top, so I retired. Hoffman California Fabrics, on the other hand, continued evolving surf culture. They were involved with all the first major beachwear brands. They helped launch companies like Jams, OP, Quicksilver, and many, many more. So from Walter and Flippy's original vision of melding the Aloha spirit into a culture came an entire industry of surfwear. Aloha shirts made of Hoffman fabrics were worn by Tom Selleck as Magnum PI and Jimmy Buffett during concert performances, as dozens of new surfwear retailers using Hoffman California design prints and fabrics were becoming hugely successful. Looking back, I'm amazed at the number of people from Dana Point who had a tremendous impact on beach culture. Each of these individuals wove their talents and passions into a movement that swept across the country and eventually the world. My dad and Flippy defining the style, Hobie leading the way in the mass manufacturing of surfboards, Grubby Clark developing the surfboard blank industry, Bruce Brown putting a lifestyle in front of audiences across the country, and numerous clothing companies supplying the look. It truly was a cultural revolution led by a bunch of longtime friends. They never set out to change the culture. They just followed their passions for a lifestyle based around surfing and the beach. And I am forever grateful for having a small part in that great era. After surfing, my competitive juices were still firing, so I looked around for a new outlet. My dad and his friends were really into motocross. They rode their motorcycles all over the empty hills around the Palisades and where the old dump used to be. They also rode a great deal down in Tecate, Mexico. I started going with them, and I fell in love with the sport. At the time, there was a motocross course in Carlsbad, the Carlsbad Raceway. They held races there nearly every weekend, and on occasion, it was a venue for a few international events. I got to know the owner of the property, who eventually gave me a key, so I could practice on the course whenever I wanted. I started racing both 125 and 250cc bikes. There were very few females racing motocross back then, so I was always racing against the guys. Being able to practice on the race course gave me a great advantage, just like practicing at the contest locations during my surfing days. And though I didn't win very often, I didn't embarrass myself either. After racing for a year or so, the Raceway hosted an all-women's national event. I captured a respectful third place against much more experienced riders. But after a broken arm, badly sprained ankle, and endless cuts and bruises, I decided to head in a slightly different direction. Auto racing. In particular, club racing. I chose a category called Sports 2000. It was a closed-wheel car with ground effects that could be geared to go 200 miles an hour. They are raced on road courses such as Laguna Seca, Willow Springs, and the old Riverside Raceway. While motorcycle racing gave the most bang for the buck, car racing was far more exhilarating than both motocross or big wave surfing. The adrenaline rush of charging around a race course as fast as you were willing to go while competing with other drivers was like nothing I ever before experienced. When you put on a one-piece Nomex fire suit, gloves, and block lava, there's no mistaking the sport's seriousness. Putting on that helmet and climbing into the tiny cockpit, the space was so tight someone had to connect your 6-point safety harness for you. You couldn't do it yourself. Racing cars required a lot of clear-headedness, and I loved it. It was the ultimate in excitement, fun, and seriousness. After a few years, I experienced a catastrophic failure at Willow Springs International Raceway near Rosemont, California. I'd done a few fast laps and was going down the back straight at about 200 miles an hour. When I reached turn 9, I needed to slingshot through the turn. All I had to do to set up the car and the ground effects was to take my foot off the accelerator for a nanosecond and then push it back to the floor. As I came out of the turn, suddenly it was like the hand of God had grabbed the steering wheel, and I was now headed for the pit wall with no ability to control the direction of the car. Fortunately, between the track and the wall was about 25 feet of dirt. As soon as my tire hit that dirt, the car spun, and I hit the wall going backward. One tire flew about 100 feet in the air and landed a couple hundred feet down the raceway. My head slammed in the roll cage, my helmet had a crater-sized dent in it, and my entire body was soon to be black and blue from my 6-point harness digging into me. But other than that, I was fine. It was a miracle. Had that car not spun around and I hit that wall feet first, I'd most likely have been seriously injured, if not killed. As much as I loved racing, I realized I wasn't willing to pay the potential price, especially since I had a beautiful 6-year-old daughter at home. So by my mid-30s, I decided to close the third and final chapter of my competitive sport chronicles and focus on full-time parenting. But not long after that, my brother-in-law, Herbie Fletcher, a very well-known surfer, waterman, and board builder, called to persuade me to get back into competitive surfing. I poo-pooed the idea. 2 weeks later, he called to let me know he had made a board for me, and I better come pick it up. I still poo-pooed it. The next day, he called to tell me that he'd entered me in a surf contest in Oceanside. So I better get down there and get that board. Now, I hadn't surfed in 10 years, let alone considered getting back in the water to compete. But Herbie knew what he was doing. He was purposely putting me in a sink or swim situation. Knowing very well that I wasn't going to pull my name from the contest, and I certainly wasn't going to allow myself to be humiliated by competing in it, I picked his board up that day and started practicing. When I think back at his persistence, it makes me smile. He wanted me back in the water, even though I thought those days were over. I ended up winning that contest and began a second phase of my surfing career. I competed on the longboard circuit over the next few years. But then I realized I no longer had the competitive fire and willingness required to win. And even at that point, I wasn't interested in just competing. I was only interested in maintaining my legacy, which meant winning. Aging and a little wisdom have a unique way of softening a highly competitive spirit and the pride and the ego that clamor to keep it full. Over the last 35 years, I've been fortunate to experience surfing as a joy and even as a spiritual outlet. And I get to do lots of other things I enjoy, which my competitive years wouldn't have afforded. Besides surfing, I spend much of my time in the great outdoors, road tripping, hiking, biking, camping, and fly fishing with my partner and our dog. I have come full circle, and my history will be I lived a very blessed life. While I didn't make it to the Olympics, surfing defined much of my life. It opened up so many opportunities. The opportunity to travel around the world and to meet so many amazing people. And it allowed me to make many dreams a reality. For that, I'm eternally grateful, as I am for my dad and family who silently cheered from the distance. Thank you for the opportunity to share this story with you and for listening. I'd be pleased to take questions and open this up to a back and forth engagement. Thank you. Anybody? Okay.
I have a question.
I
I
do
do too. What exactly did you have to do to get that key from the racetrack guy?
could see how determined I was, and like so many of the men that I encountered in my lifetime, he was very supportive of women and knocking down barriers, and so he was more than happy to allow me to practice. I think he was disappointed that I didn't win very often, but you know, it was what it was.
So
Yes.
my question is the shark story at Kochi. Can
Oh.
you share that with this crowd?
Oh, so what was it? 3 years ago, when all the great white sharks were off the coast here, just constantly, and the girl had gotten attacked at San Onofre, and the day after, and she was life flighted out of there and whatnot. She did survive. The day after that, I was stand-up surfing in front of my parents' house at Pochi, and I was outside at the reef, and there were a couple of surfers, Henry Ford, some of you might know, and a couple other guys were on surfboards, and I was on my stand-up. And I'm on my knees, and I'm looking out towards the horizon. I'm looking for a set, and all of a sudden, it's really murky. The water's really murky, and all of a sudden, I see this kind of shadow come up about 25 feet from me, and I'm going, what the heck is that? And it comes up, and the fin just breaks the surface, and I'm going, oh my God, that's a shark. That's a great white shark. Now he looked humongous. He was probably 8 feet. But I mean, he looked like you couldn't believe how big he was. So he starts slowly coming towards me, and I'm sitting there on my board, and he comes down, and he comes over beside me, and he turns, and he's about from me to you, and he starts coming right at me, just below the surface. And I don't know if he was gonna go under me, or around me, or take a big bite out of me, but as he got close, I took my paddle and slashed in the water, and he turned real fast, and his tail came up on my board and came across my board and hit me in the knees, and he took off. And Henry Ford goes, oh my God, that was a great white shark. Did you see that? I'm going, yeah, I saw it, for God's sake. So he says, what should we do now? And I said, well, you guys look like chum, because you're all surfing. I feel pretty safe, and I'm the skinniest one out here, so I'm probably the last one they're going to want to eat. So I'm going to stay out and have a few more waves. So we rode a couple of more waves, and all of a sudden he showed back up, and then even I just thought, you know, he might not notice that I'm skinny, so I think we all better go in. But that was my experience with the great white shark. Thanks for asking, Sue. Yes?
Joyce, could you tell us a little bit about the advertising part of your career that you initiated on your own and kind of built during your career to kind of promote yourself as a marketable product when other women weren't doing that at that time?
Yeah, when I was like, when I got all the publicity like Look magazine and Life magazine and Sports Illustrated, I was kind of at the forefront of everything, and I won a lot of stuff. I started looking around and going, you know, there's a lot of companies that would probably want to cash in on this. So I wrote companies, and I'd send them copies of the articles that I had done on me, and suggest that, you know, surfers like to travel, so they need luggage too. I wrote to Tourister Luggage, and they travel around the world all the time and stuff. And so next thing I know, they're sending me every piece of luggage they have. They didn't pay me anything, but they sent me every piece of luggage they had. I wrote Leland Triumph Motors, and that's how I got the Triumph car that was down at the statue. I wrote them and said, you know, surfers drive cars like this and whatnot. You should be cashing in on surfing. It's the latest, greatest thing. Sure enough, they gave me that car. When I traveled around the world that year surfing, everywhere I went, there was a brand new Triumph at the airport waiting for me. And then when I left, I just called them and said it's in the parking lot. Again, they never paid me, but I mean, you know, nobody was paying anybody anything back then anyway. And I contacted Bonnie Bell, and that's how I got the Bonnie Bell Cosmetics supported me, and they actually paid. And who else was there? There were a couple of other companies. I just started leafing through the magazines going, well, shoot, you guys should be into surfing and stuff. And it was kind of surprising.
Did you have an agent?
Well, Wormser Agency finally. Wormser, isn't it Wormser, the really big one? International, whatever they're called now. I had an agent for a while, but he only wanted billion-dollar deals, and I was so penny ante, I would take free merchandise, so we didn't last very long together. I mean, I wasn't in it for the money really anyway, but it was kind of fun to be able to get stuff like that going and stuff. And I don't think anybody else was doing that at the time. Oh, and I got a Honda motorcycle, because I told them, my dad and everybody, all the surfers motocross and use motorcycles. So Honda sent me a motorcycle. My dad thought that was great. I was kind of enterprising.
That's funny.
How things have changed.
Right.
Yes, Bill.
So when you moved to Beach Road, was that in Flippy's house? Where, that
Yeah.
you sold it, your dad sold that to Flippy after?
Right. Yeah, we lived in
And
the
you-
little house.
That after you built the big house?
I never lived in the big
You
house.
never
I'd already
lived-
left home by then.
That was my question. You never lived in the big house?
No.
When did you, go strike out on your own?
Like
You
by
know, leave Beach
18,
Road?
18. I was going to college, and then I won the world championships in San Diego, so then I went around the world and spent about 9 months traveling the world and stuff.
I was wondering, because I was a little kid on Beach Road and I never saw you. So.
That's why you never saw me.
Yeah.
Not that I would have hung out with you anyway. Well, he's a lot younger.
I was a few years older than Robin, and she wouldn't even hang out.
Well, see, there you go. Anything else? Yes.
Were any of your siblings athletic like you?
Everybody picked their own thing. Nobody wanted to follow in my footsteps. I mean, that would have been kind of hard. I'm not bragging, but I mean, it would have been. So my brother got in. He did track and field and skiing, did a lot of that. And then my sister right below me was into dancing, my mom was into dancing, so she was into dancing. And then my youngest sister got into horses. So everybody got there, and then my daughter did horses, didn't follow surfing either. So I was kind of the only surfer after my dad. Yeah.
If there are no other questions, anybody else?
Perfect.
I'd like to invite Sergio up to do the proclamation, and
Oh.
then you're all very welcome to join us downstairs for a reception after the proclamation. So thank you, and thank you, Joyce.
Yes, you're welcome.
Well, I'll keep this short and sweet. Everything that has been said and can be said has already been said, and what a fantastic story.
Thank you.
I first met Joyce at Waterman's Plaza when they were unveiling your statue,
Yes.
and I have to say, and I said it to you then, and I've said it to you since, that speech that you gave there was one of the best speeches I've ever heard, and I've heard a lot of speeches.
Thank you.
And it was fantastic, especially what you said at the end about riding that wave in and getting closer to shore.
Totally.
Woo! What a great speech.
Thank you.
And what you said today, it came to my mind that what a great story, and the next best surfing movie should be about you. Wouldn't that be a great movie? Then if you want to step out here, I have a proclamation from Supervisor Lisa Bartlett, and again, it chronicles a lot of your accolades, and I want to thank Elizabeth Bamatre for sending me all the information, and I had to write it in such small font to get it to fit that I can't even read it. But you can read it later at your leisure, and on behalf of Supervisor Bartlett, we'd like to present you with this proclamation.
Thank you very much.
All right.
And before we go down.
Oh, thank you.
But I want to write
Oh.
down.
You wanna,
Oh,
you jump.
you want me in it? Okay.
Get close. Yes. 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Hold on. Great. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you
We
very
have
much.
another little
Thank
gift
you.
for you, Joyce, so maybe you wanna put that down for a second.
Sure.
This is, Elizabeth, would you come up here with us, please, and stand on the other side of Joyce? This is a first edition book by Doris Walker, who's a known historian in
Yes.
South Orange County.
Yes.
And there's even a mention of you in there, I'm sure you'll find it. Also, we want to invite you to be a member of the Historical Society, an honorary member. And so, for your bedtime reading.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I too would like to again thank Elizabeth Joyce for her speech, Elizabeth for arranging all this, all of you for laughing with us. It was great, wasn't she?
Yes.
gonna go downstairs and toast Joyce.
Oh, fantastic.